So hi everyone. Uh, this is very interesting. I've not really done much public speaking like this before. So pardon me if I'm like a bit nervous and I stumble. So on a daily basis, I work with people facing poverty in Singapore. We don't have a poverty line here. But if you just think about people who may not have enough to eat 3 meals a day, think about people who fear that their electricity and water supply might be cut any day. Just think about people who may feel lumps on their bodies but refuse to see a doctor because they can't afford it or are fearful of what the lump might mean, not just for their health, but also their income. Or worse, that she might have accumulated a pile of medical debt and is therefore reluctant to go back to the doctor. Think of a mother or father unable to even afford milk for their kids. On this significant day, I would like us to think about this question. Where do poor people go to when they can't afford their daily needs? In most cases, you might say, hey, go get a job. In 2020, 52,000 Singaporeans earned less than $1,300 per month. Local experts calculate that the minimum income a person needs, depending on their age and family makeup, is anywhere between $1,600 to about $2,900 per month. This means that at least 52,000 Singaporeans are living anywhere between $300 to 1.6K below what it takes to survive in Singapore. And this is before the current global inflation crisis, before we take into account that. The cost of living is increasing as we speak. And so if the jobs don't pay enough, poor people turn to the government for help. Many turn to their SSO. What does that stand for? Social Service Office. And then they go there to get help. But many report facing great difficulties here. Many find the process undignified. Tak maruah. I once brought some volunteers with me to accompany someone to get help from their SSO. And you know what they said? Why does she have to carry so many documents just to prove that she's poor? Then I joked with her, oh, you don't know, SSO is basically Accra for poor people. In Accra, rich people register their businesses. In SSO, poor people have to register their poverty. And just like you must prove you're a real proper shop to register a business, at the SSO you must prove you're really poor. But instead of thousands or even millions, they must be careful that every single cent the applicant spends on is accounted for. Oh, you bought fish for Chai Fan. Of course lah, you poor. You made poor choices. You must eat chicken. Then you won't be so poor lah. Many tell me that it really boils down to having a good Comcare officer. By the way, that's a real account, right, from an SSO officer. So what happens to people who don't have a good paying job or sufficient welfare? They still have needs to meet. And if not their needs, then what about their children? If they haven't yet given up on living, where do they turn to? Anybody know the answer? They turn to crime. In Singapore, we often say crime is very low. But do you know what 2/3 of all offenses in prison are? Drug offenses. And do you know how many prisoners are considered poor? For some reason, I tried to find this data, but it was not available to the public. I did found that about 70% of prisoners receive a secondary level education or lower. And we know in Singapore that you can actually peg sort of education levels to your income level. So we can make the assertion that the overwhelming majority of people in prison are working class. More than that, they are poor. But there are two types of drug offenses, aren't there? At one level, you have the crime of abusing drugs. And at the other, it's about trafficking. And very often, abusers are also traffickers. For example, think about Syed Suhail, who is currently facing death row. He himself was a heroin addict. And then he became a drug courier. Many of those on death row are blue-collared workers or were formerly unemployed. Our dear Nagendran, rest in peace, was a security guard. Dachana was a delivery worker. Kalwan Singh worked in a mortuary. He drove a lorry, among many other things. Now, Amnesty International put out a report saying that most people on death row are low-wage workers, unemployed, or just in very unstable jobs, cash-pay jobs, some people would say. Some people say gig work, but it all means the same thing. It also shared that many people on death row had enormous debts to service. And there was a high level of deception in the way that they got into the job. They didn't know what they were getting themselves into. Then there are those who are addicts who also traffic, as I mentioned. Now, without any other financial means, these guys see no choice but to finance their addiction through being employed in the drug trade. If you were to look at the drug addiction problem in Singapore as a never-ending ant trail, right? You know, a trail of ants, I think we're all very familiar with that situation at home. Doesn't it look like the government is going at it completely the wrong way? Now, their solution seems to be to kill the ants as they come. But this won't stop the trail entirely, wouldn't it? Especially if it's a trail that keeps reappearing again and again. The solution surely should be to identify the source. Might that be a stray apple lying somewhere in the hidden corner? In this case, what is the stray apple in our drug situation? I think it's fairly obvious that it's poverty, isn't it? Now, if we invest in actually, substantially ending poverty, I strongly believe that less people would need to traffic drugs to earn a living. The prisons have been trying to refer inmates to upskilling courses and employment opportunities, but this is nowhere near sufficient to end poverty. With the rising cost of living, wages and welfare assistance must rise accordingly. We need a proper minimum living wage. We need to stop introducing more unnecessary taxes on the man on the street and start taxing people who could well afford it. This means to stop the GST hike. We need rent control. We need universal health care. Medical debts should not even have to exist. And we need a welfare system that truly functions for the people and not one that makes the people the enemy. Why don't you tell me, if you've only studied till PSLE and the only job you can get is a dishwasher, the fact that they can't pay you anything less than 2.9K a month, wouldn't that give you some level of comfort? If you could feed you and your children 3 delicious, nutritious meals a day, buy them milk for their development as children, celebrate their birthdays, spend some precious time with them outside of work, afford going to the doctor without fearing accumulating any medical debt, be assured that the power in your house wouldn't suddenly go off, and be able to live in a house without the fear of eviction, would you even think about trafficking drugs? But a minister would say, I don't see anyone doing vigils for the victims of the trafficking. Those who are the drug addicts. Now, I believe that people who are addicted to drugs need help and not punishment. If the minister claims to care so much for this population, sir, we don't need you to do vigils. We just need you, as someone who has the power to do so, to make the situation better for addicts to get the help that they need. As Kirsten Han has pointed out many times, if drug abusers see their doctors when they relapse, these doctors are legally obliged to report the drug offenders to the police. In this case, it doesn't matter how much money you have. Even if you go to the private facility, this is what will happen. With such a policy, why would any drug user want to get help for their addiction in Singapore? Even for those who go for rehabilitation, many have said that it feels like prison with extra counseling. For those who have the means to do it, they go abroad and check themselves into expensive rehabilitation facilities. Minister Sir, since you claim to care first and foremost about the people who become addicted to drugs, why don't you make some of these dreams a reality for addicts in poverty in Singapore too? Poor people matter too, don't they? If we can turn people away from drug trafficking by eradicating poverty and treat drug addiction as a public health issue, why doesn't our government do any of these? I believe it is because compared to eradicating poverty, it costs them much less to keep the death penalty. So they sell it to us as the final solution. By killing the ants on the trail instead of addressing the root source, they sell it to you that they are taking a tough stance against the issue. It looks tough, sounds tough, but the ants keep coming. It's harsh, but is it smart? They call it capital punishment, but I only see workers getting punished. They want you to think that the problem is 60 or so blue-collar workers, largely from Singapore and Malaysia. They make them sound like Pablo Escobars. They want you to lay the blame on these guys when really the problem is a ruling elite that isn't willing to invest in its people's health and welfare. With the death penalty affecting mostly poor people, does the government want to abolish poverty or does it want to abolish poor people? But not only is prison a way of putting poor people who fall between the cracks away from society's sights, have the ruling elite also learned how to profit from prisoners too? Did you know that there are companies in healthcare, food and beverage, and construction, some multi-million-dollar, by the way, that hire prison labor under a government scheme known as SCORE, SCORE. They pay prisoners between 30 cents to $2.60 per hour. This was made clear in Parliament very, very recently this year. There are poverty wages, and then there are prison wages. Are we creating a system where companies become addicted to profiting from a steady flow of low-cost prison labor? Even cheaper than migrant workers. Earlier, I said that 52,000 Singaporeans earn less than 1.3K a month. In that same year, the 50 richest in Singapore increased their wealth by $37 billion. Do we really have a shortage of funds to eradicate poverty in this country? Because our government makes themselves multimillionaires from our tax dollars, they are part of this class of ruling elite too. And so, when asked to tax the ultra-rich, the PAP agreed that they should in principle, but came up with many excuses as to why they couldn't do it, and instead they hiked GST. This ruling elite may buy good-class bungalows, drive nice fancy cars, and are even willing to pay for the airfare for foreign billionaires, but they will be the first to cut your pay or sack you if you come to work late once or twice. Is that fair to you? Or they may cut a few hundred from your financial assistance for an absurd reason. Does that make sense to you? They will invest in fancy shower faucets to have long baths, but will tell you that you're poor because you're not saving enough water. Is that fair to you? They will go for holidays in Peru and Australia, but will question why you spend your last SSO money to go to USS with your 8-year-old daughter. Is that fair to you? And then the same people who have been telling you this will tell you that the death penalty is what keeps you safe. But this time, will you believe them? The death penalty only works if we continue to buy what they are selling. For the benefit of everyone harmed by the drug trade, users, traffickers, families, and loved ones, we need to treat substance abuse as a public health issue. To end trafficking, let's end poverty, not life. Thank you very much.